Long before the fall of Goliath beneath David's sling, there were whispers of others, brothers born of shadow and strength, whose names the world has forgotten. They walked the earth when the stones themselves were young, when the memory of the flood still haunted the valleys, and when the line between heaven and earth was thin as morning mist. 5 giants, born of one blood, each carrying within them the ancient curse of their forefathers. Tonight, beneath the veil of forgotten scripture and the dust of crumbling tablets, we uncover the mystery of the brothers who defied the heavens and fell into the silence of history. This is their story. This is what they never tell you. In the beginning, after the great waters receded and the earth breathed again, there remained something strange upon the land. The book tells us that giants walked the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. But the flood, though it cleansed the world, did not erase every shadow. The nephilim, those fallen ones, left their mark. Their blood seeped into the soil, their legacy passed through hidden veins. In the lands of Canaan, in the places where the sun sets red over ancient stones, there arose tribes of men who were not entirely men. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the Emim, names whispered in fear by those who dared to cross their territories. These were the remnants, the echoes of a primordial defiance. And among them, in the coastal cities of the Philistines, where the sea meets the sand and the old gods still held dominion, there arose a lineage of giants whose very existence challenged the order of creation. There was a man, though some say he was more than a man, whose name was Rapha. In the ancient tongue, his name meant the healer or the giant, a paradox that speaks to the mystery of his nature. Rapha dwelt in Gath, one of the 5 great cities of the Philistines, a place of iron forges and warrior kings. It is said that Rapha himself was descended from the scattered remnants of the Anakim, those towering sons of Anak who once made the spies of Israel tremble and declare, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." From the loins of Rapha came forth 5 sons, each born under a different moon, each marked by the ancient curse that ran in their blood. They grew not as ordinary children grow, but with an unnatural vigor, their bones lengthening, their sinews strengthening, until they stood head and shoulders above the mightiest warriors of their age. Their mother, whose name is lost to time, is said to have wept when she first beheld them, for she knew that children born of such stature were not meant to live long in a world governed by the God of heaven. The 5 brothers were known throughout the land, from the hills of Judah to the valleys of Elah, from the coastal plains to the mountains of the east. Their names, preserved in fragments of ancient text and whispered in the oral traditions of the desert tribes, have come down to us like shadows cast by a dying fire. The eldest was called Lahmi. His name, inscribed in the Chronicles of the Kings, marks him as the brother of Goliath the Gittite, he whose spear shaft was like a weaver's beam. Lahmi was said to be the most contemplative of the brothers, a giant who spent long hours gazing at the stars, as if searching for answers in the heavens that had once cast down his ancestors. He was a warrior, yes, but also a keeper of forgotten knowledge, a student of the old ways, the ways that predated the covenant, the ways that remembered when the earth was young and the boundaries between flesh and spirit were not yet fixed. Lahmi's downfall came not in a glorious battle, but in a quiet confrontation, almost an afterthought in the great chronicles of war. It is written that Elhanan, the son of Jair, slew Lahmi in the battles against the Philistines, striking him down with a precision that seemed almost ordained. Some say that Lahmi welcomed the blow, that he had grown weary of carrying the weight of his giant's frame, weary of the curse that ran in his blood. His last words, unrecorded in any canon, are said to have been a prayer, not to the gods of Philistia, but to the God of Abraham, a plea for mercy that was never answered, or perhaps was answered in the only way it could be, through death, through release. The second brother bore the name Ishbi-benob. His was a name of power and pride, for in the old tongue it meant dweller in the high place. Ishbi-benob was a warrior born, a giant who delighted in the clash of bronze and the thunder of chariots. He carried a spear that weighed 300 shekels of bronze, and he wore armor that shone like burnished gold in the sun of battle. It is said that he once sought to kill David himself, the anointed king, the slayer of his brother Goliath. The scripture tells us that when David grew faint in battle, Ishbi-benob pursued him with murderous intent, believing that the favor of the God of Israel had finally departed from the shepherd king. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, David's kinsman and mighty man, came to the king's aid. In the swirl of dust and blood, Abishai struck down Ishbi-benob, ending his ambition and his breath in a single blow. But there is more to this story, whispered in the margins of the text. Some traditions hold that Ishbi-benob, in his final moment, looked not at Abishai but beyond him, beyond the battlefield, beyond the veil of the material world. He saw, they say, the hand of something greater descending upon him, and he understood at last that his life had been but a small movement in a symphony composed before time began. He fell not with a curse upon his lips, but with something akin to wonder. The third was named Saph, which in the ancient tongue means threshold or basin. He was the most enigmatic of the brothers, a giant who seemed to exist at the boundary between worlds. Saph was known not for his size alone, but for his strange silence. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were riddles, prophecies that no one could interpret until long after they had come to pass. Saph fell in the battle of Gob, struck down by Sippai the Hushathite, one of David's mighty men. The text is brief, almost dismissive. There was war at Gob with the Philistines, and Sippai the Hushathite killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rephaim. But the oral traditions of the region tell a different tale. They say that Saph knew the day and hour of his death long before he entered the field. He had dreamed it, seen it in visions that came to him in the deep watches of the night. He walked into battle not to win, but to fulfill what he believed was his destiny, his appointed end. When Sippai's blade found his heart, Saph is said to have smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and whispered a final riddle. The threshold is crossed, the basin is filled, and the shadow returns to the light. No one understood his meaning then. Perhaps no one understands it still. The fourth brother has no name in the texts that survive. He is known only as the giant of Gath, a man of great stature who had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number. This physical peculiarity marked him as one touched by the ancient curse, a man whose very body testified to the unnatural origins of his lineage. This nameless giant was said to be the most ferocious of the brothers, a warrior who knew no fear and showed no mercy. He defied Israel openly, taunting them, challenging them, invoking the old defiance that had first brought the giants into conflict with the divine order. But his pride became his undoing. Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, David's own brother, confronted him in battle and slew him. The text records it simply, but the implications are profound. Even the bloodline of David, even the youngest and least of the king's kinsmen, could overcome the greatest of the giants when they stood in the strength of the covenant. In the traditions of the desert storytellers, this nameless giant is sometimes called the Herald of the End, for his death marked the beginning of the final decline of the giant clans. After him, no more giants arose in Gath. The line of Rapha was broken, and the world began to forget that such beings had ever walked upon it. And then there was Goliath. The most famous, the most feared, the one whose name has echoed through millennia. Goliath was not the eldest, nor was he the wisest, but he was the champion, the one chosen to stand in the valley and challenge the armies of the living God. His height was 6 cubits and a span, nearly 10 feet of muscle and bone and ancestral fury. His armor weighed 125 pounds, and his spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, its iron point alone weighing 15 pounds. For 40 days, Goliath stood in the valley of Elah and hurled his challenge across the ravine. Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. It was a challenge rooted in ancient ritual, in the old ways of deciding the fate of nations through single combat. Goliath believed in his strength, in the power of his lineage, and the inevitability of his victory. But there came from the hills a young man, a shepherd, a boy with smooth stones and a sling. David, the son of Jesse, the anointed of the Lord, walked into the valley with no armor save faith, with no weapon save trust in the God who had delivered him from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. And when Goliath saw him, he despised him, mocked him, cursed him by his gods. David's reply has echoed through history. You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down." And so it was. The stone flew true, sinking into the giant's forehead, and Goliath fell like a great oak severed at the root. David took the giant's own sword and cut off his head, and the armies of Israel pursued the fleeing Philistines, and the valley ran red with the blood of the defeated. But the story does not end with Goliath's death. In some ways, it only begins there. For his brothers, watching from the walls of Gath, understood in that moment that their time was ending, that the age of the giants was passing, that the old order was giving way to something new, something ordained by a power they could neither comprehend nor resist. Why were these stories told? Why were the names of the giant brothers preserved, even in fragments, even in the margins of sacred text? Perhaps because they represent something more than history, more than mere genealogy. The giants stand as symbols of human pride unmoored from divine purpose, of strength that trusts only in itself, of power that forgets its source. In the ancient world, the giants were a reminder that not all strength is holy, that not all power is righteous, that there are forces in the world that oppose the order of creation, that seek to establish their own kingdoms on foundations of flesh and fury rather than covenant and compassion. The 5 brothers of Goliath, each in his own way, embodied this tragic defiance. They were not evil in the simplistic sense. Indeed, the traditions hint at moments of nobility, of contemplation, of something almost like longing for redemption. But they were caught in a web woven long before their birth, a curse that ran in their blood and determined their destiny. Their deaths, one by one, at the hands of David and his mighty men, were not mere military victories. They were spiritual declarations, affirmations that the God of Israel was sovereign, that no matter how great the opposition, no matter how tall the enemy, no matter how ancient the curse, the covenant would prevail. The giants fell not because they were weak, but because they stood against that which cannot be opposed and ultimately survive. And so, as the dust of their bones returned to the earth, only echoes remain. In the ruins of Gath, in the silent valleys where their blood once soaked the ground, in the fragments of text and whispers of oral tradition, we find traces of the 5 giant brothers. They are a reminder, perhaps, that every age has its giants, powers that seem invincible, forces that appear eternal, structures that tower over us and demand our submission. But the lesson of the brothers is this: all things pass. All giants fall. All towers crumble. And in the end, it is not the strength of the arm or the sharpness of the spear that endures, but the quiet faithfulness of those who walk in covenant with the eternal. The story of Goliath and his brothers is not merely about ancient battles and forgotten lands. It is about the eternal conflict between pride and humility, between self-reliance and trust in the divine, between the kingdoms we build with our hands and the kingdom that is built by hands unseen. As you close your eyes tonight, as you drift into the realm of dreams, remember the giants. Remember their strength and their sorrow, their power and their fall. Remember that even the mightiest are but dust before the wind of eternity, and that the only true strength is the strength that comes from surrendering to that which is greater than ourselves. Let the story settle into your spirit like seed into fertile ground. Let it grow there, quietly, patiently, until one day you awaken and realize that you have been transformed, that the giants in your own life have lost their power, that you stand, like David, with nothing but a stone and a promise, and that is enough. The brothers are gone. Their names are nearly forgotten. But their story remains, a testament to the truth that has always been and will always be: the divine order prevails, the covenant endures, and every giant, no matter how tall, will one day kneel before the throne of the eternal. Rest now. Let the ancient voices fade into the darkness. Let the mystery of the giants carry you into sleep, where all questions find their answer, and all stories find their end.